UFC 241 goes down tomorrow night, Saturday, August 17th in Anaheim, California. The main card starts at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and it features the long-awaited, about 1 year in the making, rematch between the champ, DC Daniel Cormier, versus Stipe Miocic. And on top of that, the co-main features the long-awaited, 3 years in the making, return of the always polarizing Nate Diaz versus Anthony Showtime Pettis. Something tells me both those two fights are going to be absolute fireworks. I cannot wait. Personally, I don't think this entire card is stacked from top to bottom by any means, but the top 3 fights on this card, in my opinion, probably make it the card of the year so far in 2019. I already mentioned the main event and the co-main event, and then the fight before that is just as exciting for me. It goes down in the middleweight division, and it features Yoel Romero returning to fight Paulo Costa. I absolutely cannot wait for all 3 of those fights. I think all 3 will be on the edge of your seat, action-packed fireworks from the get. So, yeah. To say I'm excited would be a huge understatement. After those 3 fights, my interest, I would say, honestly, drops off quite a bit. Aside from the Corey Sandhagen versus Rafael Assunção fight, which I don't know why that's not on the main card. Corey Sandhagen is a very exciting up-and-coming prospect at 135 pounds, so it's kind of confusing to me why that's on the prelims. I don't even think it's the feature prelim either, so I don't know. The other 2 fights on the main card are a featherweight bout between Gabriel Benitez and then the first bout to get things started on the main card is another middleweight fight between Derek Brunson and Ian, I know I'm going to butcher this one, Heinisch, I believe. No hate against Gabriel Benitez or Sodiq Yusuff, but why that fight is on the main card, and like I said, the Corey Sandhagen Rafael Assunção fight is not. I don't know, man. Shrug emoji. No idea. Confusing to me. Nevertheless, though, regardless of where the Rafael Assunção Corey Sandhagen fight actually is placed on the card, I don't think it matters too much. I mean, I'm going to watch the whole card from start to finish anyways, most likely. I think that fight will be a great one, though, and I think Rafael Assunção is a beast, man. He's beat the who's who of contenders and fighters at 135 pounds. He's only lost to the absolute top dogs. But Corey Sandhagen, like I said, is a very interesting and very talented up-and-coming prospect. He's 10-1 as a pro, and he's coming off a very exciting and impressive win over the recently released John Lineker. So this fight should be a very good measure of where Corey Sandhagen is truly at 135 pounds. If he can beat Rafael Assunção, especially in impressive fashion, then honestly, I don't think he's too far away from a title shot. So I'm looking forward to that fight, and then like I've already said a couple times, the top 3 fights. Aside from those, though, I will say I am also looking forward to that Derek Brunson fight. So there's definitely a couple that I'm very interested in aside from the top 3, like I said. But that top 3, man, I think you could take those 3 fights at the top of the card, and like I said, stack them up against any fight card this year. And for me, UFC 241 comes on top if you're only comparing the top 3 fights to, like I said, any other card throughout the year. Aside from that, once you move down the card, maybe it's a little bit shallow, but those are 3 fights I think anybody can get excited about. With all that said, enough talk. Let's go ahead and jump right into my predictions for the main card of UFC 241. We'll go ahead and start out at the bottom of the card in the middleweight division with a fight between Derek Brunson and Ian, I know I'm butchering this, Heinisch. Man, this is it's going to be an interesting fight. You never really know what you're going to get with Derek Brunson these days. He has some really exciting performances, and then he has some really pretty much the opposite of exciting performances. Ian Heinisch is coming off an extremely impressive performance against Antonio Carlos Jr., aka Shoeface, who is an absolute beast of a jiu-jitsu player on the mat, and Ian Heinisch absolutely dominated him the entire fight. So to say I was impressed with that performance would be a huge understatement. And I think if Derek Brunson uses some of his old tools, which was his wrestling before he fell in love with his hands, I think he might be in a world of trouble if he tries to take this fight to the ground, because I think Ian definitely has a huge advantage there. Standing up, it should be a lot more interesting. I like Ian's striking better, but you could maybe say Derek Brunson arguably packs more power, although in Ian's past 5 fights, 3 of them came by way of knockout with strikes. So based on that, I don't know, maybe you can't give the power edge to Brunson. But I think he definitely has the wrestling edge. Aside from that, I don't know. He's ranked higher. He's ranked number 8. Ian's ranked number 10. Derek Brunson's last performance was a very lackluster performance against the usually less than exciting Elias Theodorou, who honestly, to be fair, is tough to get against. So I don't know how much you can pull from that. But before that, he was on a 2-fight losing streak. So going into the fight, I think there's a lot more momentum behind Ian. Personally, I think he's the more talented fighter, and I think he will show why tomorrow night. I think Ian Heinisch gets it done via unanimous decision after 3 rounds. Moving on to the next fight, which takes place in the UFC's featherweight division between Gabriel Benitez and Sodiq Yusuff. Once again, hope I didn't butcher either of those 2 names too bad. I'll be honest, guys, although I've been pretty much religiously watching mixed martial arts for the last over 10 years at this point, not too familiar with either of these fighters. So take this prediction with a grain of salt for sure. I don't think I've ever seen Gabriel Benitez fight. I have seen Sodiq fight. I saw his fight on Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. Since then, he's had 2 fights in the UFC. His most recent performance was against Shayman Moraes, and I was incredibly impressed with that performance. So because of that, and the fact that, like I just admitted, I haven't really seen much of his opponent, I'm going to go ahead and go with Sodiq Yusuff via unanimous decision. Moving on back to the middleweight division. Woo! These next 3 fights, man. Whew, I cannot wait for tomorrow night. Yoel Romero versus Paulo Costa. These 2 have been going at it for, I want to say, like a year now. They're probably 2 of the most jacked dudes in the UFC for sure. How Yoel Romero looks like that at age 40, I have no idea. That dude has absolutely Superman genetics. His athleticism is absolutely off the charts. On the other side, Paulo Costa, that dude looks like a superhero too. He hits like a friggin' truck, but he has faced nowhere near, up until this point, the level of competition that Yoel Romero has. Paulo Costa's last fight was against Uriah Hall, and to be honest, Uriah Hall was landing on him early. Uriah Hall is a very hot and cold fighter. You never know what you're going to get with him. Some of his fights are extremely impressive. He's a very explosive fighter, and then in the next fight, for whatever reason, he can look absolutely terrible, where he's very hesitant to throw, and it seems like he gets beat by guys who have no business beating him. So it's tough to say which Uriah Hall is going to show up. But in that fight, I don't think it mattered too much. Like I said, Uriah Hall landed a little bit at the beginning of the fight, and then Paulo Costa, once he hit him, man, he was just relentless. He was just hitting him with hard shot after hard shot, and like I said, that dude hits like a truck. Once the second round came around, it was kind of inevitable at that point, and it was only a matter of time until Paulo Costa finished Uriah Hall, and he eventually did via TKO with an accumulation of just absolutely brutal shots. So what we don't know about Paulo Costa up until this point is how his gas tank is, where his cardio's at. He's 12-0 as a pro, and not a single one of his fights have gone past the second round. So Yoel Romero's not the easiest dude in the world to finish. Yoel Romero's only been finished once in his 16-fight pro career. So I don't really think Paulo Costa's going to be the man to finish him for that second time, unless Father Time truly has finally caught up with Yoel Romero, which, you know, sooner or later, Father Time always wins. He's undefeated. But I don't think this is going to be the fight where Yoel Romero noticeably just kind of falls off a cliff as far as like his athleticism and his instincts and his reflexes. I think this will be a case of too much too soon for Paulo Costa. I think he's very talented. I think he, like I said, hits very hard, hits like a truck. I think he has a very bright future ahead of him at 185 pounds if he chooses to stay in that division. But I think tomorrow night Yoel Romero will just be too much. Yoel Romero's very, he's patient, therefore he's good with his cardio, and he knows when to explode, and he knows when to sit back and preserve his energy. I think Paulo Costa is going to pretty much blitz him in the first round, go all out. I think he will land some good shots on Yoel Romero. I don't think he'll land the shots that will finish him, but in doing so, I think, honestly, I think Paulo Costa will win that first round because of his aggression, but I think he's also going to gas himself out in the process, which will open him up to getting finished by some crazy explosive strike like Yoel Romero is known for. I'm going to go ahead and say Yoel Romero finishes Paulo Costa in the third round by... This part's hard. I don't know if it's going to be a knockout or a TKO. We haven't seen Paulo Costa finished up until this point. We don't know how his chin is, so I'll say TKO. So final prediction, Yoel Romero, third round, TKO. Moving on to the co-main event, the 3 years in the making return of Nate Diaz versus the always incredibly entertaining and former UFC champion Anthony Showtime Pettis. This one also has a ton of hype behind it for many obvious reasons. Nate Diaz turned into a superstar after his 2 fights with Conor McGregor. Anthony Showtime Pettis has always been an absolutely can't-miss fighter. All of his fights are very exciting. And these two have kind of had a back and forth for quite a few years now. There's reports that back in the day, a few years ago, Nate and his brother Nick Diaz tried to jump Anthony Pettis in some club. And they've just kind of been going back and forth for, like I said, a few years. I think Nate Diaz had some harsh stuff to say when Anthony Pettis was champion. So, yeah, those two don't like each other. I think there's a very real hate between those two, which sometimes leading up to fights, two fighters kind of like to pretend they hate each other to try and sell, more pay-per-views or try and generate a little more fan interest. But I think between these two, the hate is real. How much that plays into the outcome of tomorrow night's fight, I don't know. To be honest, Nate Diaz has always been kind of an emotional fighter. He always fights with his heart on his sleeve. He's always trying to get inside the head of his opponents. He's always flipping them the bird in the cage, talking crap to him. So for Nate Diaz, I don't think anything's going to be different. Whether or not he likes the guy or dislikes the guy, he's pretty much always pretending he dislikes the guy, or maybe he always does dislike whoever he's fighting. It's really tough to say with him. So I don't think his performance will be affected regardless of whether or not he truly hates Anthony Pettis. But Anthony Pettis, I don't know. It's tough to say because one good example of that is a couple years ago or quite a few years ago at this point, when Nate Diaz fought Donald Cowboy Cerrone. Cowboy Cerrone, without a doubt, fights a lot better, in my opinion, when he likes the dude he's fighting and they like him back, or at least they don't hate him. Nate Diaz definitely got into Cowboy's head leading up to that fight. Because of that, Cowboy fought emotional, and as a result, Cowboy did not have a very good performance in that fight. Nate Diaz, for the most part, pretty much dominated the fight. I'm not saying that will be the case with Anthony Showtime Pettis. Pettis has admitted in quite a few recent interviews that he really, really does not like Nate Diaz, and he's listed quite a few reasons why. So I hope he doesn't go in there fighting too emotional. Either way, I think it's going to be a great fight. They're both very exciting fighters, and I think, honestly, as fans, we're in for a treat tomorrow night. I'm excited to see what Nate Diaz looks like after 3 years off. That's a long time, but Nate Diaz has always been known for his cardio. He's always been known as a guy that constantly stays in shape, doing triathlons and all kinds of other stuff. It seems like he's always doing something active. So personally, I don't question that his cardio won't be where it needs to be. I think he will be fine cardio-wise. And because of that, I think the 3 years away from the cage won't affect him nearly as much as maybe it would some other fighters. And I don't think the ring rust will be too much of a problem with him. As far as my fight prediction, man, that's a tough one. They're both exciting strikers. Anthony Pettis, known much more for his Showtime attacks, if that's what you want to call them. I mean, look no further than Anthony Pettis' last fight against Wonderboy, when, in my opinion, Wonderboy was dominating pretty much that whole fight up until that crazy knockout, which, what was it, like a Superman left hook or something? I don't remember, but it was crazy the way it ended. Anthony Pettis definitely had a game plan. He definitely stuck to it very well. He was fighting Wonderboy, who's a very tough dude to look good against, and Wonderboy is known as absolutely one of the best strikers at 170 pounds. Going into that fight, Pettis' game plan was to try and just absolutely wear out Wonderboy's legs. So he just threw leg kick after leg kick after leg kick. But in my opinion, Wonderboy is still dominating the fight. He was busting Anthony Pettis up. But Anthony Pettis stuck to his game plan, man, and all it took was that one shot. And boom, knocked out Wonderboy. I think the first person to ever do so. I mean, Tyron Woodley, who's known as a very hard hitter, couldn't even knock him out in 2 fights. And that's Anthony Pettis' teammate. And he's also known as the much bigger guy. He's always fought at 170 pounds. Whereas Anthony Pettis, what is this, his second fight at 170? So with all that said, I'm just having a tough time predicting the winner of this fight. I'm so excited for it. I keep going one way, and then I change my mind and go the other way. But my final prediction is Nate Diaz will get it done. I think it's going to be by a somewhat close unanimous decision. I don't think it will be a split decision, but I think it will be a close fight. Before I move on to the main event, I also want to talk about the ground game a little bit. They both have very good jiu-jitsu. Nate Diaz is obviously known for his incredibly good jiu-jitsu, and I think Anthony Pettis has some of the most underrated jiu-jitsu in the UFC. And the reason people don't talk about it all that much, even though he has quite a few great submissions in the UFC, it's probably because his striking is just so impressive and so exciting to watch that I think sometimes people sleep on his jiu-jitsu and don't really think about it too much when they're talking about Anthony Pettis. But if the fight does go to the ground, and I hope it does because I really want to see how the jiu-jitsu game plays out, I think it might be kind of a stalemate. I don't think Nate Diaz will have a big enough advantage to actually submit Anthony Pettis, but I think it'll be very interesting and fun if it does go to the ground, so I hope it does at some point. With that said, no matter where it goes, whether it stays standing or it goes to the ground, I think they're very evenly matched, but I think what will win Nate Diaz the fight is his cardio and his relentless pressure. I think eventually the accumulation of punches and just the sheer aggression and the fact that Nate Diaz just never lets his opponent take a breath, kind of like Tony Ferguson, is why he'll win this fight. Pettis was doing great in the Ferguson fight until at one point Ferguson just does not let up. I think him and Nate Diaz have the best cardio at 155 pounds. Both of them are just cardio machines. Both of them just have relentless pressure. They don't let their opponents take any breaths at all in the cage. And eventually, I think that's what won Ferguson the fight against Pettis. Although I think the fight ended in between rounds because Anthony Pettis, I think, said he had a broken hand. I honestly think the pressure just wore Pettis out and he just had enough at that point. And I think it will be a little bit of the same tomorrow night against Nate Diaz. I think it will be a great fight like the first 2 rounds, but I think in the 3rd round, Nate Diaz is going to eventually wear him down. I don't think he'll get the finish, but I do think he'll win a somewhat close, like I said, decision. Moving on to the main event of the evening, which once again features the long-awaited rematch between Daniel DC Cormier, the current champ, versus the former champ Stipe Miocic. Where to begin with this one? If you watched the first fight, you probably noticed that Stipe was doing very good at the beginning of the fight. The first couple minutes of the fight, he was doing great. He was definitely getting the better of the exchanges. I would say he was landing the better punches. He actually took DC down at one point early on in that first round, and I think he was doing really well as a whole. But the fight did end in the first round, and although there was definitely, I think, eye pokes on both sides, I don't think that really factored too much into the finish. Some people think it did. I personally don't, because like I said, both of them eye poked each other at some point throughout that first round. I think what it came down to is Stipe, like I said, he was having the early success in that first round. I think he got a little bit too comfortable. Daniel Cormier is very dangerous in the clinch. The dude hits very hard at heavyweight. He's knocked out a lot of guys. He's undefeated at heavyweight for a reason, and he has basically an iron chin. He's only been finished once. He's only lost once, and that was to John Jones, an enhanced version of John Jones via head kick. So Stipe hits hard as well. A lot of heavyweights do. Stipe has finished quite a few guys himself at heavyweight via punches, but like I said, until proven otherwise, I would still say that DC definitely has an iron chin. Going back to what I was saying though, I think Stipe's downfall in that first fight was he got a little bit overconfident due to his early success. He was trying to clinch with DC, which is a bad idea. Daniel Cormier is a beast in the clinch, and he hit Stipe with a shot he didn't see coming. And ask any fighter, they'll always say the shots that hurt you the most or can put you out are the ones you don't see coming, and that is exactly what happened in that first fight. Without a doubt, I would say Stipe was winning that first round almost up until that point. The finish happened with like maybe 30 seconds left in the first round, so maybe like a minute before that, DC started having a little bit more success. He started landing his own shots. He was definitely finding his rhythm. And DC is not known as a fast starter by any means. He's lost or been losing quite a few first rounds, especially at light heavyweight, before he gets things going, before he gets a read on his opponents. He gets their rhythm and timing down, and then he truly comes to form, and he starts just taking the fight over. I think that's kind of what we saw, but I also think part of it was DC got comfortable. He started getting Stipe's timing down. And another part of that, like I just mentioned, is I think Stipe just got way too comfortable because he's having so much success early on in that first round. Going into the second fight, I don't know how much will have changed, to be honest. I still think both of them are very dangerous fighters. Like I said, Stipe is a finisher. He packs power. I think he could finish DC, but like I said, until proven otherwise, DC has an absolute iron chin, man. He has been hit with some hard shots at light heavyweight and heavyweight, but he's a whole different beast, a whole different animal at heavyweight. I think he's the best heavyweight in the world, although he's not the biggest by any means. But the dude's a tank, man. He hits hard and he can take a shot. I think Stipe, once again, is going to have some early success. I think his game plan will probably be to stay on the outside. He's got the longer reach, land some jabs, land some shots from the outside. I don't think he'll be trying too much grappling in this fight. I definitely think he'll try and stay away from the clinch, and because of that, I think he'll have a lot more success throughout the fight than he did in that first fight. I think early on, it'll be very interesting to see if he's as aggressive as he was in the first fight. But like I said, I think he's going to avoid the clinch like the plague, and because of that, I think the fight will last a lot longer. But honestly, I see it going pretty much the same way as far as who's going to win. I think DC's going to win because, like I said, I think he's the best heavyweight in the world right now until proven otherwise. And also, like I said, he's just an absolute beast at heavyweight, man. He's a whole different fighter at heavyweight compared to light heavyweight. He's a beast at light heavyweight too, but just completely different animal at heavyweight. So I think Stipe is a great heavyweight, arguably one of the best of all time. But I think DC is just going to be too much for him, man. I think Stipe will have success early on, just as he did in that first fight. It might even last longer, maybe go into the second or third round. But I think eventually DC will get going. He'll start slow, he'll get going, and then he'll really turn it up, man. I think, like I said, I've already said a couple times, I just want to emphasize this. I think the fight will last a lot longer because Stipe is going to avoid that clinch at all costs. I think there might be some grappling exchanges because Stipe himself is a good wrestler. He's the bigger wrestler. I don't think he's the better wrestler because DC is one of the best wrestlers in MMA, no doubt about that. So I think the wrestling will kind of cancel each other out. And Stipe's got much longer reach, like I said, so I think he'll land quite a few of his own shots. I think he'll have a lot of success on the feet. But all it takes is one shot from DC, as we learned in their first fight. And that's what I think is going to happen. I think it will take a little longer to happen because, like I said, Stipe is not going to be nearly as aggressive. He'll be a lot more cautious getting close to DC. But DC has shown to have great cardio, especially as a heavyweight. Stipe does as well, so I think we'll go into the fourth round. It will be very competitive up until that point. Great fight. And then DC is going to catch him with something once again and win the fight by knockout or TKO. If I have to make a pick, which I do because these are my picks for UFC 241, Daniel Cormier wins the fight and retains his heavyweight championship via knockout in round 4. So there you guys go. There you have it. Those are my picks for UFC 241. Let me know what you guys think down below. Do you agree with me? Do you think I'm way off? Who do you think is going to win and why? Drop your predictions down below. With that said, that's a wrap for this video. So enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the fights tomorrow night. And I'll see you next time.
Oh my goodness! Oh my God! Just like that! That is some serious power! Wow!